Hey, Steve-O here. We're continuing our discussion on DOGE and Elon, and this time we're going to focus especially on what that process is contributing to, which is the executive orders of President Donald Trump. The executive orders go all the way back to George Washington, although they didn't used to record them in the same way we do now. They're now given numbers to keep track of them, but George Washington issued a few, and as a matter of fact, one of his first ones had to do with the kind of china to be used at White House functions, the little pretty dishes and everything. But they're basically not specified constitutionally, but the chief executive, the president, has the job of making sure that the laws that Congress enacts are faithfully carried out, and so executive orders have to relate to making sure that those laws are actually carried out. That's the big picture on executive orders. Now, Thomas Jefferson, for instance, issued 4 executive orders in his administration. Franklin D. Roosevelt issued 3,721, many of which were unconstitutional, by the way. Interestingly, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, you think would be politically very different, but they were almost tied in the numbers that they issued with. Ronald Reagan had 381 and Bill Clinton had 364. So they're not uncommon, and of course here in this early stages of the Trump administration, he's riding them fast and furious, which I think is necessary because we know from his last term that the other party is going to mount a raging offensive against anything he does or says. So he kind of launched this blitzkrieg war, and that's probably a good thing. But once again, the purpose of executive order is just to make sure that the laws of Congress are faithfully carried out. And also, everything that Congress does or the president does, the executive has to do, must keep in mind the constitutionality of everything that is done. Every law, every executive order must respect constitutional limits. And so with that regard, let's just answer the question, how do we evaluate these executive orders that are coming out in these early days of the Trump administration? Well, most of them are relating to the gross waste and abuse and just the personal wealth-enhancing nature of the spending that has been done by Congress that is being found by DOGE and the team that Elon is leading. And so when we think back to the first video on this series, and we talked about how in the preamble of the Constitution, one of the things everyone who is in public office on a federal level is supposed to look out for is the constitutionality of what they are doing. And part of that is our duty to secure liberty for our posterity. Now, for me, posterity includes everyone, all you young people. Anyone under the age of 50 is young to me. I want you to have liberty and not be enslaved financially. And yet, our government has been spending, we've just seen it. U.S. aid has a 93% fraud rate. 93% of this multi-billion-dollar budget is just pure fraud. Many of it going to political cronies and other former office holders who have companies that are supposedly doing good works in the name of foreign assistance. So anyway, it's just these executive orders that are currently coming out are mainly aimed at cutting spending that is just totally wasteful, totally self-interested, totally probably unconstitutionally as well. And so I would say, first of all, these executive orders are necessary in order to restore constitutional principles, starting in the preamble of the Constitution. We've got to look out for our young people and those who are yet born. We don't want them to be born into a society where you have to take a wheelbarrow full of money or your credits on your digital currency that are just absurd, which we're kind of heading that way anyway. So here's the big thing. Do we have a constitutional crisis? Yes, we have for decades before the current administration. Executive orders have been abused. Unelected officials have made huge unconstitutional movements that have hurt us all. We have players who are not even in the government, people like George Soros or the many non-governmental organizations who are taking down our constitutional freedoms. And so, yeah, the elephant in the room is, we have a problem with constitutionality. and why certain people are suddenly screaming about it when all DOGE and Elon are doing is just auditing the way the money is being spent should tell you, back to our passage from Ephesians, that we should have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness as Christians. So we need to keep our eyes on these forthcoming executive orders to make sure that they do relate to constitutional truth, but at the same time, just to oppose them because certain people in Washington or on the news media are screaming about the unconstitutional nature of them, no. Why do they mind if we're just pointing out where the waste is? One of the things we found out from this process is that we've been funding Hamas and other organizations, people like George Soros, who are completely anti-American. George Soros leads an organization, or founded an organization called Open Borders, which he is for the removal of this concept of nationality with borders to be respected. And that may sound good to you, but I do want you to think back to one thing in the history of Christianity, and that is the Catholic Church. If you look at how that started, it's not biblical. It just kind of happened over time where they ended up with a chief elder that we commonly know as the Pope. And whenever that became corrupt, with so much of the world under the umbrella of what is called the Catholic Church, everything became corrupt. It affected people all over the place. The same thing with nations and states. And one of the nice things about the United States is, just because California is messed up right now doesn't mean that North Dakota has to be messed up. We have separate states, separate laws, and the power of the federal government under the Constitution is extremely limited. No, it's not right now. Yeah, we have a constitutional crisis. It's not DOGE and Elon. It's not President Trump currently, but we got to keep our eyes on him. It's our job. If you're not familiar with the covenantal law principles and how this works, you can also check out my videos on the mass deportation situation, because once again, I mentioned in there, as Christians in this nation, the Constitution did not just give us the right to participate in the governmental process. We have the duty to do so. It is our duty before God to stay involved with the governmental process. And so let's just take one more look at something here, because this comes up. I've seen some people who run Christian charities talk about this. U.S. aid. We talked about this in the last video, but turns out about 93% of the billions that are spent by U.S. aid are fraudulent. They found out, for instance, that we spent a ton of money building a power plant in Afghanistan so the people of Afghanistan could have electrical power. Sounds really nice. Given to a company that is partly owned by a guy named John Podesta, who was in the Obama administration and the Clinton administration. And power station wasn't really built. It was a little bit like producing 2% of the projected power because most of the money just evaporated. I can tell you one thing, Mr. Podesta is doing fine, as are a number of our government-affiliated officials. So the question is, though, is that for those Christian organizations taking money from USAID, if that money gets shut off, isn't that bad? Well, I'm just going to ask you once again, Ephesians 5, 11 through 14, have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of evil or darkness. You cannot do charity from tax dollars. Charity is something that comes from the individual who actually owns the money, and we, the people, Constitution, that's our money. And is each taxpayer, if your charity is getting money from USAID, is each taxpayer looking at your organization? Let's say that they're an agnostic or an atheist or a Muslim, and they're going, yeah, I want to support that Christian organization. No. It's kind of like when they take our tax dollars and support and kill and pay for abortions. It's not, in no way, shape, or form was the Constitution ever give the government that kind of power to either do charity, because it's not charity, it's theft. Can a Christian organization take part in theft? I would say no. Charity is money given from a heart that is grateful to God. So I would say if your organization is taking money from USAID, I would run away from that. So let's unpack this big question. For the time being, we as Christians need to keep our eye on those executive orders and make sure that they do relate to the Constitution. that they are not a usurpation of the executive authority, because it's very possible they will be, just like under FDR. We're still suffering under the nonsense that he put forth. So yeah, we got to keep an eye on it. But in general, once again, as you see people just totally objecting and screaming suddenly about the Constitution that most of them have never read, it's because they're profiting from it personally. They're profiting from it ideologically, and we as Christians can have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness. So let's get busy, let's stay involved. If you need more guidance on how to stay involved in government as a Christian under a covenantal form of government, do get my book, Superhero, Being Who God Says You Are, from your local bookstore, from bookshop.org. Try to buy it local if you can. It's available at all the big companies too if you want to do it that way. Anyway, let's do this. Steve-O out.